Welcome to the debate. Today we are taking on perhaps the single most terrifying concept in the history of human thought, free will. We are diving deep into a collection of theological commentaries by Marie-Noël Thibaut, specifically looking at the texts for the sixth Sunday of Ordinary Time. We are talking about a collision between ancient wisdom literature, the Book of Ben Sira, and, well, the absolute buzzsaw that is the Sermon on the Mount in the Gospel of Matthew. And it brings us to a dilemma that, frankly, it breaks most people's brains if they think about it too long.
It really does. It's what I call the sort of bait and switch dilemma of the Bible. You open the Old Testament reading, and it looks like this beautiful, almost democratic promise. You have a choice between fire and water. Pick one. It sounds like genuine agency. It sounds fair. But then you flip a few pages to the gospel, and you are handed a moral standard that is so impossibly high, so psychologically invasive, that it suggests the choice was, well, maybe it was rigged from the start.
That is exactly the tension we are navigating. The central question is, does the biblical definition of free will actually offer human beings a real shot at agency? Or does the subsequent fulfillment of the law by Jesus create a standard of perfection that renders human choice, completely futile? I'm the advocate. I will be arguing that these texts, specifically through Thibaut's lens, present a radically optimistic view of human nature. I believe the material shows that the law is intended as a user manual for happiness, a gift for a creature that is fundamentally good.
And I am the dissenter. And I'm arguing that while the ancient texts offer a nice theory of freedom, the New Testament interpretation, specifically Jesus' so-called fulfillment, introduces a structural impossibility. I argue that the biblical project shifts from offering liberty to imposing a crushing standard of perfection that basically guarantees failure. I'm arguing that what looks like a choice is in fact a setup.
All right, let's get right into the mechanics of this choice because the imagery is so vivid. We start with the Book of Ben Sira, also known as Ecclesiasticus. This is wisdom literature from around the 2nd century BC. Thibaut highlights a verse here that is just, it's startlingly direct. It says, "The Lord has set fire and water before you. Stretch out your hand to whichever you prefer." And then, "Life and death are before men, and whichever they choose will be given to them."
Whichever you prefer. It sounds like you're standing at a buffet. It implies the will is perfectly neutral and the options are perfectly accessible.
It is stark. But to understand why this is so revolutionary, Thibaut points out the cultural context, which I think is fascinating. She contrasts this biblical view with the prevailing myths of that era, specifically the Babylonian creation myths. Now, in the Babylonian worldview, how are humans made? They were created from the blood of a slain monster mixed with clay.
Right, it's the bad seed theory.
Exactly. And the result of that recipe is that humanity is mixed by nature. We are part good, part bad, and we can't help it. We are, defective by design. Our violence, our chaos, it's just the monster blood acting up.
Which, to be fair, is a very convenient explanation for why humans do terrible things. I didn't want to burn down the village, but the monster blood made me do it. It kind of absolves us of responsibility.
Precisely. And Thibaut argues that the biblical revelation in Ben Sira is a total violent rejection of that fatalism. Ben Sira is basically screaming, no, evil is not in your nature. God is total love. The text says explicitly, He has commanded no one to be ungodly. If God is love, He doesn't create trash. He doesn't create traps. Therefore, if He sets fire and water before you, you must possess the genuine, uncorrupted capacity to choose the water.
Okay, I follow the anthropology. It's a beautiful idea. We aren't born broken, we're born free. It's optimistic. But here's my problem. That theoretical freedom runs smack into a brick wall when we move to the Gospel of Matthew. We're looking at the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus stands up and says, "Do not think I have come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it."
Fulfillment. That is the key word.
I know you love that word, but let's look at what it actually looks like on the ground. The way He fulfills the law is terrifying. He takes manageable rules a normal person can actually follow, and He weaponizes them. The old rule was, do not kill. Okay, I can do that. I haven't killed anyone today. I'm a good person. I chose the water. But Jesus says, no, that's not enough. He says if you are even angry with your brother, you are liable to judgment.
He's going to the root.
He's going to the impossible. He says if you call your brother a fool or raka, you are liable to the fires of Gehenna. If you look at a woman with lust, you've already committed adultery. Thabit notes that this is the wisdom hidden before the ages that Paul talks about. But just look at the practical implication. If the standard for life, the water, is that I can never even feel a flash of anger or a moment of lust, then the choice isn't fire or water. The choice is fire or a standard of perfection no human has ever met. That's not a choice. That is a trap.
See, you're interpreting fulfillment as an escalation of difficulty, almost like a video game level. That's just too hard to beat. But I think you're misdiagnosing the source of the difficulty and the nature of the evil we are talking about. Let's dig into Thabit's argument regarding the origin of evil, because this is the pivot point for the whole debate. You seem to think this internal struggle, the anger, the lust, proves that Ben Sira was wrong and that we are in fact broken.
Well, doesn't it? I mean, if I can't stop myself from screaming at a driver in traffic, doesn't that prove the monster blood theory is actually more accurate than the free choice theory?
No. Talbot argues it proves the opposite. She points us back to Genesis. In the biblical narrative, where is the serpent? Where is the tempter?
In the garden.
Right, but specifically, is the serpent inside Adam? Is it part of his DNA? No. The serpent is an external intruder. This is a massive theological distinction that Thabit hammers home. If evil were internal, if we were the mixed beings of the Babylonian myth, we couldn't be saved. Because to get rid of the evil, you'd have to destroy the human. You can't filter out the monster blood without killing the patient.
Okay, so the theory is that evil is a parasite, not an organ?
Exactly. Evil is an intruder. And because it is external, we can be separated from it. We can be cured. The fact that you struggle against anger, the fact that there is friction, proves that you are distinct from the anger. You are standing at the crossroads Ben Sira described. The struggle isn't a sign of failure. It is the exercise of freedom. If you were truly evil, you wouldn't struggle. You just enjoy it.
That is a lovely, clean distinction for a theology textbook. The devil made me do it is just the religious version of the monster blood made me do it. But let's look at the boots on the ground reality. Thabit references the letter of James in her commentary. James writes, each is tempted by his own covetousness, his own. And Jesus locates the sin in the eye and the heart.
He does.
So if the intruder is external, as you claim, why is the remedy so violently internal? Jesus says, if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. That's not a gentle separation of a parasite. That is self-mutilation. It feels like gaslighting to tell a human being, you are naturally good, the evil is outside, and then hand them a manual that says, by the way, your own desires are lethal, so you need to spiritually dismember yourself to survive. How do you reconcile that?
You are taking the metaphor of tearing out the eye as a sign of self-hatred rather than as a radical commitment to health. And this brings us to the second major point of friction. What is the law actually for? You see it as a penal code designed to catch us slipping so God can punish us. But Thabit points to Psalm 119, which is central to this week's reading.
The longest psalm in the Bible. It goes on forever.
It does, and that's the point. Thabit explains it's an acrostic poem. It's this massive literary structure where the author uses every letter of the Hebrew alphabet, 22 stanzas, to list synonyms for the law. It's not a rule book, it's a love song. The psalmist writes, I run in the path of your commands, for you have set my heart free. They don't see the law as a cage, they see it as counsel.
Define counsel in this context, because do not commit adultery sounds like an order, not advice.
Well, Thabit clarifies that the Hebrew word Torah doesn't strictly mean law in the modern legal sense, like a speed limit. It means instruction or pointing the way. Think of it as a user manual. If you buy a complex machine, like a high-end sports car, the manual tells you, don't pour sand in the gas tank. Now you could say, that rule restricts my freedom. I want to pour sand. But the manual isn't trying to oppress you. It's telling you how the machine works.
Okay, I like the car metaphor, but let's apply it to Matthew 5. If I pour sand in the gas tank, the car breaks down, cause and effect. But in the Sermon on the Mount, If I call my brother a fool, Jesus says I am liable to the Gehenna of fire. That's not a mechanical breakdown. That is capital punishment. That is the manufacturer blowing up the car because I scratched the paint.
But we need to define Gehenna, so we aren't just throwing scary words around.
Gehenna was the valley outside Jerusalem. It was the city dump where they burned trash and sometimes corpses. It was a place of perpetual fire and waste. In the text, it represents total destruction.
Right. So ask yourself the hard question. Why does Jesus equate anger with total destruction? Is he being mean? Or is he revealing a mechanism of reality? The Butt argues this is the fulfillment of the law. The old law was what she calls the minimum vital. Basic survival rules. Don't kill is just enough to keep society from collapsing. If everyone kills everyone, game over.
Sure, basic survival.
But Jesus is moving humanity from survival to maximum love. He's pointing out a brutal truth about the human machine. Anger is the root of murder. Contempt is the root of genocide. If you call your brother a fool, you have already dehumanized him in your heart. You have already started the process that leads to the trash heap of Gehenna. Jesus isn't setting a trap. He's showing you that true freedom requires liberation from the impulse to hate, not just the act of hitting someone. If you want to drive the car at maximum speed, which is love, you simply cannot have sand in the tank.
But who can do that? That is my point. You call it maximum love, and that sounds beautiful, but it requires a capability that humans clearly don't possess. I can control my fists. I cannot control my subconscious flashes of irritation. And this leads to the third problem, which I think is the most disturbing, the hidden wisdom.
This is the passage from 1 Corinthians.
Yes. Paul talks about a wisdom hidden and secret, decreed before the ages. But Butt notes this is totally distinct from the wisdom of the rulers of this world. But here is the problem. If the rules of the game were established before time began, and they rely on a secret wisdom that the eye has not seen and the ear has not heard, are we not choosing in the dark?
Choosing in the dark?
Yes. Ben Sira says, stretch out your hand, implying the options are clear. Fire, water. But if the real criteria for judgment, like the equating of anger with murder, are part of a divine mystery that opposes human logic, then we aren't free agents. We are subjects in an experiment we don't understand. If I don't know that anger equals death, because that wisdom is hidden, how is my choice free?
I love that you brought up the limit of human understanding, because Thaumateeb has a brilliant counter to this in her commentary on Deuteronomy. She distinguishes between the tree of knowledge and the tree of life.
The two trees in Eden.
Exactly. Think about the primal sin. What was it? It was grasping for the tree of knowledge. It was the desire to know everything, to understand the hidden mechanics of the universe exactly like God does. To be the engineer of reality, we can't have that. We are finite. We will never fully understand the why of the hidden wisdom.
So we are blind? We are just following orders we don't understand?
No, because we are given the tree of life. The Butt identifies the tree of life as the Torah, the law. The text in Deuteronomy says, the command is not too high for you, nor is it far off. We don't need to understand the complex engineering of the universe, the hidden wisdom, to operate within it safely. We just need to trust the user manual.
That sounds an awful lot like blind obedience rebranded as trust. Don't ask questions, just do what the book says.
It's not blind, it's paradoxical. And this is crucial. The hidden wisdom Paul talks about isn't a magic trick. The Butt clarifies, the hidden wisdom is the cross. It's the idea that true power comes from self-giving, not conquering. That is hidden from the rulers of this age. To a Roman governor or a modern CEO, turning the other cheek looks like stupidity. It looks like losing. It makes no sense to the wisdom of the world.
It certainly doesn't.
But the believer sees that this paradoxical behavior is the only thing that actually stops the cycle of violence. We aren't choosing in the dark. We are choosing between the world's obvious power, which leads to death, and God's paradoxical love, which leads to life. The choice is clear, even if the wisdom behind it feels completely upside down.
Paradoxical is right, but I need to land this plane on the reality of human performance. You can talk about the cross and self-giving and hidden wisdom, but at the end of the day, the but in her conclusion on Matthew admits something very telling. She discusses the advancement of this kingdom of God. And how does she describe it?
She says it advances slowly but surely.
Slowly. Why is it slow? If the two ways were as simple as Ben Sira suggested, fire or water, life or death, we'd all be drinking water by now. We'd be living in paradise. But we aren't. We are still angry. We are still covetous. We are still killing each other. The way of life presented by Jesus feels less like a gift and more like an endurance test that the vast majority of humanity is failing. The slowness of the kingdom proves the impossibility of the law.
It is steep, I won't deny that. And Thabit doesn't deny it either. But she gives us one final image that reframes the struggle, and I think this is the key to the whole puzzle. She calls the gathering of believers, the mass, the community, a construction site.
A construction site.
Yes, think about a construction site. It's messy, it's unfinished, there is debris everywhere, it's loud, it doesn't look like a building yet. But the law isn't there to condemn the building for not being finished yet. The law is the blueprint.
But a blueprint that demands a structure that defies gravity?
A blueprint that demands a cathedral when we are used to building mud huts. The fact that the building is hard to build doesn't mean the blueprint is a trap. It means the project is grand. And this is where the theology of grace comes in, which Thabit emphasizes. The gap between the blueprint and the building, that isn't filled by our willpower alone.
You're referring to the Redeemer.
Yes. That but reminds us that the word Redeemer literally means liberator. The Christian claim is that you don't climb this mountain alone, you are grafted onto the one person who actually fulfilled the law, Jesus. The struggle confirms your agency, you have to keep showing up to the construction site, but the Redeemer ensures the victory. He provides the materials we lack.
So in your view, the impossibility of the law is actually the point? It forces us to rely on the liberator?
Exactly. If the law were easy, if it was just, don't kill, we would be self-satisfied. We wouldn't need a redeemer. We would stay in the mud hut. The impossible law forces us to stretch out our hand not just for the water, but for the help to drink it.
And that is the gamble, isn't it? We are left to decide if we view these impossible moral standards as external chains that doom us to guilt, or as the necessary, painful tools that are slowly, painfully carving out a better version of humanity.
That is the question. The material asks us to trust that the hidden wisdom knows us better than we know ourselves. It asks us to believe that the user manual, however difficult to read, is actually trying to keep the machine from blowing up.
A fascinating, if terrifying, proposition. It leaves the listener with a lot to weigh. Is the fire inevitable, or is the water actually within reach?
That is for them to decide. Thank you for listening to The Debate.